It all started on a blistering Saturday afternoon when the neighborhood HOA decided they were suddenly the sheriff's department, patrolling around in their little golf cart with the fake magnetic badges slapped on the sides like they were rolling in from some low-budget cop show. I was in the backyard working on replacing the fence panel my wife had kicked in during a sparring session. Yes, sparring session, because if you don't already know, my wife Claire isn't the yoga and cupcake type you'd expect in our cul-de-sac. She's active duty Delta Force, still deployed part-time on classified missions that I know better than to ask about, and the kind of woman who can break a man's wrist in less time than it takes him to say, "Excuse me." The sun was roasting my neck, and the hum of lawn mowers was steady background noise when I heard a commotion out front. Not the usual HOA Karens screaming about trash cans kind, but sharp, clipped voices, a commanding bark, and a tone that instantly put my military instincts on edge. So I dropped the hammer, wiped my hands, and jogged around the side gate just in time to see one of the self-appointed HOA police, a stocky, red-faced guy in mirrored sunglasses with an inflated sense of authority, standing in our driveway with his hand resting dangerously close to the grip of what looked like an actual Glock 19 holstered on his belt, and Claire, in cut-off jeans and a faded Delta Force t-shirt, standing between him and our front door with that still-as-a-statue stance that told me she was one bad word away from action. Apparently, according to him, she was trespassing on our own property because the HOA had temporarily repossessed it for violations, a nonsense phrase I'd never heard in any legal dictionary. And when Claire had laughed, in his face, he'd escalated, flashing the gun like it was a prop to scare her. Only she wasn't scared. She was assessing distance, angle, wind direction, grip strength, all the quiet math soldiers do before they decide if they're going. "To dismantle you." I stepped in, voice steady, asking what the hell was going on, and that's when another one of them pulled up in a black pickup, also armed. Not airsoft pistols, but real steel slide handguns, meaning we were well past HOA politics and into felony territory, and I could see our nosy neighbors peeking from behind curtains, phones in hand, not to help but to record for their little Facebook gossip group. They started barking about unpaid fines, $27,000 worth, allegedly, for unapproved military activity on HOA grounds, which was code for Claire training in the backyard and scaring Karen's yappy dog into silence. I told them to get off our property before I called the real police. But the leader, let's call him Rick, because of course his name was Rick, smirked and said they were the law here. And that's when Claire's posture shifted. A fraction. Her left foot sliding half an inch, her breathing slow and steady like she was on the tarmac in Kandahar, and I knew someone was about to regret their life choices. Rick made the mistake of pulling his weapon fully, pointing it chest high at Claire, and in less than a blink she moved. My brain barely registering the blur before the gun was in her hand, his wrist bent backward in a way God never intended. His knees buckling under her grip, and the second guy frozen in shock just long enough for her to pivot, sweep his legs out from under him, and relieve him of his weapon too, all without breaking eye contact with me. She tossed both guns on the hood of my truck, leaned down to Rick's ear, and said something I couldn't hear, but was enough to drain the color from his face entirely, and that's when I realized this wasn't just an HOA power trip. These guys weren't random volunteers. They had training, not as much as her, but enough to know the weight and balance of their guns, enough to take formation without speaking, which meant someone had organized this, someone with resources, and it sure as hell wasn't for a late trash can fine. Neighbors started filming openly now, Karen herself waddling up with her little clipboard, shrieking about assault and charges, while Claire, cool as ice, calmly dialed a number that wasn't 911, muttered a few words I recognized as military code, and hung up without another word. Within minutes, a nondescript black SUV rolled into the cul-de-sac. No sirens, no lights, just an aura that made even the cockiest HOA enforcers shuffle backward. Two men and one woman in plain clothes stepped out, scanning the scene, and, while they didn't flash badges, their body language said "federal" in every movement. They collected the guns, took statements in clipped sentences, and quietly escorted Rick and his buddy into the SUV without so much as cuffing them, which was almost worse because it meant they weren't going to county jail. They were going somewhere else, somewhere the HOA didn't control. Claire didn't explain much to me, just said, "It's not over," and went back inside like she hadn't just dismantled two armed men in front of half the neighborhood, leaving me standing in the heat with my heart hammering, wondering what line had been crossed today that couldn't be uncrossed, and who in our little suburb was pulling strings strong enough to send fake cops with real guns after a Delta Force operative who was still very much active duty. The rest of that day felt like holding my breath underwater. Nothing moved quite right. The sunlight seemed too sharp, the air too heavy. And every time a car slowed near our driveway, I found myself tightening my grip on the wrench I'd been holding since the fence repair, but Claire didn't seem rattled at all. She was in the kitchen, slicing vegetables with that methodical precision she brought back from deployments, the kind that said her mind was running 20 steps ahead of everyone else, and when I asked her, point blank, what the hell had just happened, she just said, "They weren't HOA, and they weren't here for fines," which sent my stomach into a slow roll because if they weren't after money, it meant they were after her, and if they were after her, then someone had burned. A lot of time, money, and favors to find out where she lived and in her line of work that didn't happen by accident. Later that night, while the neighborhood's glow of TV screens flickered through curtains, I saw a faint red light dancing on our living room wall, a reflection off the front window. And when I stepped closer, I spotted the unmistakable sweep of a laser sight cutting across the yard. I dropped low, called out for Claire, and she was already moving, gun in hand, hair pulled back, eyes locked on the angles like she'd been expecting this. And the moment the light flickered toward the kitchen, she fired a single suppressed shot through the window frame, and the red dot vanished. We both slipped outside into the shadows, keeping low until we reached the hedges by the curb, and there, in the gutter, was a shattered monocular scope still warm from the shooter's hand. That was all the confirmation we needed. This was surveillance, not intimidation, and the fact that they'd brought live optics this close to our home meant they weren't afraid of escalation. She told me to pack a go bag, no arguments, and within 10 minutes, we were in her matte black Jeep, heading toward a stretch of service road I didn't recognize. No headlights, moving like a ghost through the suburbs until we reached a warehouse. Complex that looked abandoned from the outside, but inside was alive with quiet, controlled chaos. Maps pinned to walls, gear laid out on tables. 3 people I'd never met but who greeted Claire with a familiarity that told me they'd been through fire together. She pulled up digital schematics on a laptop showing me the HOA's main office, a squat brick building by the community pool. But on her blueprint, there were 3 basement levels not listed on any public record, with server racks, an armory, and a secure comms room, all hidden under what was supposed to be a rec center. "This isn't a homeowners association," she said. "It's a front." And as she explained, the pieces started falling into place. Those sudden security patrols last month, the HOA fee hikes, the influx of new officers we'd never seen before. All of it was cover for an off-the-books intelligence outfit using the neighborhood as a staging ground. Their mistake was thinking Claire was just another spouse they could bully, not realizing she still ran missions, where the briefings were blacked out even for other branches. Over the next 48 hours, we worked in that warehouse like it was a forward operating base, her team intercepting comms, mapping guard rotations at the HOA compound, tracing funding channels that ran from fake landscaping contracts to shell companies with offshore accounts. And the deeper they dug, the dirtier it got. There were shipments of unregistered firearms moving through the HOA's maintenance shed, encrypted satellite uplinks hidden in the pool house ceiling, and a roster of names that included not just shady ex-military, but at least one sitting city council member. The plan, when it came, was pure Delta Force. No dramatic standoffs, no TV cameras, just silent entry, data extraction, and asset neutralization. But I'll admit, my pulse was jackhammering when I found myself in black fatigues at 2 a.m. Crouched beside Claire by the HOA's back loading dock, the air thick with summer heat and adrenaline. She picked the lock on the steel service door in seconds, slipped inside, and we moved down a narrow concrete stairwell that smelled like oil and bleach, emerging into a room lined with server towers humming softly under blue LEDs. Her teammates fanned out, plugging in data skimmers and drive cloners while I kept watch, my ears straining for any sound over the fan noise. And then it came. The creak of boots on the stairwell. Before I could signal, Claire was on the move, vanishing into shadow, and I heard a muffled grunt, followed by the quiet slide of a body hitting the floor. She reappeared, calm as ever, dragging a man in an HOA security uniform who looked a lot like Rick's second-in-command. Only now, he had zip ties cutting into his wrists and a look in his eyes like he'd just seen the gates of hell. The extraction was almost clean, almost. But as we hit the second basement level, a reinforced door slammed shut behind us and red emergency lights bathed the hallway. A voice crackled over the intercom. Male, smug, too self-assured, for his own good. Welcoming the sergeant back to his real home. And the way Claire's jaw set told me this wasn't just another op. Whoever was running this show knew her, maybe even served with her, and as the sound of multiple boots thundered toward us from both ends of the hall, I realized this wasn't going to end in a clean getaway. This was about to turn into a siege in the belly of the HOA's hidden fortress, and the only way out was going to be through them. The hallway felt like it was shrinking. The red emergency lights casting everything in a throbbing glow that made every movement look more dangerous, more final, and the air was thick with that metallic tang of recycled air you get in underground facilities. I could hear them coming from both directions, the heavy boots of at least a dozen men, moving in coordinated rhythm, not the sloppy shuffle of rent-a-cops, but the measured pace of people who knew how to clear a room. Claire dropped to one knee, pulled a smoke canister from her vest, and rolled it down the left hall, the hiss and bloom of white fog swallowing the first wave of incoming shadows. Then she spun and slapped a breaching charge on the reinforced door ahead of us, pressing me back with one hand just before it blew inward with a thunderclap that shook the walls. We rushed inside, and my eyes widened. The room was an ops center, rows of monitors showing live feeds of every street in our neighborhood, thermal scans, even aerial drone footage. On the central screen was a map of the city, peppered with red markers that stretched far beyond our HOA boundaries. And in the middle of it all, leaning back in a leather chair with a smirk like a man who'd been expecting company, was a tall, broad-shouldered figure in tactical black. And the way Claire froze told me this wasn't just another target. This was personal. "Hello, Sergeant," he said, his voice dripping familiarity. "Or should I say, Mrs. Civilian?" And the way he twisted that last word made it sound like a taunt. She didn't answer, just circled him like a predator. And he kept talking, bragging about how he'd been tracking her since their last mission overseas, how he'd built this whole operation under the guise of a suburban HOA to move weapons, launder cash, and recruit useful veterans into his little off-the-books army. I pieced it together. The fines, the patrols, the sudden influx of new officers, all bait to push her into revealing herself, and it had worked, only now he'd overplayed his hand. Before he could finish his speech, Claire moved, fast as a shadow cutting across light, disarming the pistol at his side and slamming him against the bank of monitors hard enough to spiderweb the glass. His men stormed in through the smoke, but her team was ready. Flashbangs burst white in the doorway, concussive pops dropping the first wave before they could even aim, and I found myself grabbing one of the downed men's rifles, covering the right flank while the rest of her unit cut through them with that terrifying efficiency only elite operators have. The room became a whirl of shouts, gunfire, and crashing equipment, until the last of the fake HOA soldiers were zip-tied on the floor, and the only sound was the crackle of damaged monitors. Claire hauled the leader, now bleeding from a split brow, into the center of the room and demanded the access codes to the encrypted server bank. And when he laughed, she didn't raise her voice. She just leaned in and whispered something I couldn't hear, but whatever it was made him go, dead pale, and start typing. The data dump began, screens scrolling faster than my eyes could follow. Entire networks of names, accounts, and offshore transfers spilling out, enough to take down not just the HOA front, but every connected operation across the state. As soon as the drives were secure, she gave a single sharp whistle, and within minutes the same unmarked black SUVs from the other day were pulling up above us, federal agents flooding the compound like they'd been waiting for the signal. Which, I realized, they had. The leader was dragged out in cuffs this time, loaded into a van with no windows, and the rest of the men followed, silent and beaten. Upstairs, the rec center looked untouched, the pool still shimmering under the nightlights, the volleyball net swaying gently as if nothing had happened. And I knew that by morning, the HOA would issue some bland statement about personnel changes and temporary closures, without a single neighbor knowing the war that had just been fought under their feet. Back at the warehouse, Claire handed the drives to a man who didn't give a name, just a nod, and then turned to me like we'd just finished grocery shopping, not dismantled a paramilitary ring. "It's done," she said, but I caught the flicker in her eyes that told me she knew better. Nothing is ever really done in her world, just paused until the next move. And sure enough, as we drove home in the soft light before dawn, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Nice work. We'll be in touch." I glanced at her, but she was staring straight ahead, calm, unreadable, and for the first time I understood that marrying a Delta Force operator meant our quiet suburban life would always be a cover, the calm eye of a storm most people would never even see. And as we pulled into the driveway, past the freshly mowed lawns and sleeping houses, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, behind one of those perfect white fences, another set of eyes was already watching, already planning, because in this neighborhood, the HOA was just the tip of the spear.